Yes, my question is for Lidia Thorpe. What practical provisions would you put into any treaty and the processes before and following them that would ensure that a treaty does not disadvantage Indigenous people and will protect their sovereignty? And how long do you think it would take to get this result?
Thank you for your question. I think that's a very important question, and only clans and nations can make decisions for themselves. Even to entertain the idea of a treaty, they have to have free, prior and informed consent and self-determine their own destiny, something that this other alternative does not give you. So a treaty is about peace. It's about us participating in this society in a way where we can prosper, like everybody else seems to do in this country. We're the sickest, poorest, dying every day. Nothing's going to change by an advisory body. We've told the government that we don't want to cede sovereignty. We've told the government to implement the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, the Bringing Them Home report, which are 30 and 20-year-old reports. And we see the Closing the Gap report every year. Where are they failing? Incarceration and child stealing. They're two reports that even when Labor were in power last time did not implement. So if we need to do anything in this country, it's save our life and implement those recommendations at the next sitting. It's so simple. But there's no political will from this government to do that.
Well, that's wrong. That's wrong. And I'll tell you why it's wrong. Because we know that we've got Senator Pat Dodson, who was a Royal Commissioner on the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, and I've never worked with anyone who is more passionate of wanting to ensure that the incarceration rates in this country drop. There is no doubt that every state and territory jurisdiction has responsibility for the jails and for the custodial sentences, and there are many that need to improve their game. There's no doubt about that too. And in terms of sovereignty, well, we have said on numerous occasions, even as recent as the Senate estimates through the Attorney General's office, that sovereignty in terms of the voice, of course First Nations people will not cede sovereignty. I'm a Yanyuwagato woman from the Gulf of Carpentaria. We've never ceded sovereignty. And do you think I'd stand by and let that happen? No way. So please, it's a misnomer. Sovereignty will not be taken over or lost in this process.
How quickly, because part of the process here is voice treaty truth, that treaty should come from voice. How quickly will it move, if there was a successful referendum, to a treaty process?
Well, we've certainly made the commitment directly to the Uluru Statement from the Heart with voice treaty truth. We want to establish a McCarthy Commission, which we know is about when two sides come together.
Will this be the sort of treaty that Lidia is talking about?
Well, in terms of Lydia's thoughts in terms of a treaty, and this is where I did want to explore it once we went back to the Senate, but we know that a treaty is underway in different jurisdictions across the country at various levels, okay? So each state and territory are trying to do their best. We've seen in South Australia that they're already working towards a legislation in terms of a voice and treaty. So we know in the Northern Territory we're trying to do the same. Now, we're all at different levels of that, but whether the federal government can do that sooner, well, that's obviously a debate we still have to have in the Senate.
But it does play into whether people are going to vote for the voice or not. And, you know, I'm obviously quite well declared where I'll be voting and what our parties
Are you also opposed
decided.
to a treaty as well as the voice?
To answer the question, though, I was speaking to locals in the northeast of Victoria, Aboriginal locals, about this exact question. They were supportive of the voice until they heard the Prime Minister say it's just an advisory body, it's only got advisory capacity.
So you would like it to have more power?
I'm telling you what Indigenous Australians that I represent in Victoria...
That's my mob you're talking to.
Yeah, well, that I spoke to. I don't presume to speak on behalf of Indigenous Australians, Stan. I wouldn't do that. But what they've told me is that they were going to vote for the voice until Albo said that, and now exactly saying Victoria is well down the path to treaty, and so they think the voice is something more remote communities need and that Victoria is well on the way.
Yeah, they're setting up a treaty mechanism in Victoria, so they've still got to negotiate all the treaties.
They've put a list of demands in.
Yes, and what they might do. But what we've got to remember is that a treaty is between two sovereign parties, and The only real treaty that we've seen in Australia at the moment is the Noongar native title claim over Perth, where the West Australian government and the Noongar people came to an agreement. There was land swapping, there was, compensation paid. That's what a treaty's about. And at the Commonwealth level, that is going to be extremely hard because we'll have to have 250, 300 individual treaties across the nation.
Lidia, can I just ask you before we move on to the next question as well? There will come a time this year, we know that the referendum is on the agenda and there's going to be a date set and we're going to go to the polls and we're going to have to vote. When you stand there on that day, right now, which way would you vote, yes or no?
Well, and thank you, Sis, for your explanation on the sovereignty question, because I'd really like to see that as part of the legislation, or even put in our constitution that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, or First People of this country, are the sovereign people of the lands. That would be amazing if Labor could do that. Because in Victoria, when it come to the treaty negotiations, Labor in Victoria refused to acknowledge that we were the sovereign people of the land. So we can talk about all the deadly treaties around the country, but we need national leadership on a treaty. We need to unite this country.
And if a voice can deliver that, sorry, Lidia, on the day, which box would you tick? Right now?
Well, it depends how many lives we can save between now and then, Stan, in implementing the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. If all the states and territories can agree to a voice, then why can't they agree to raise the age of legal responsibility so we can let our children out of these prisons, which you look in the Northern Territory right now, we're full of our children and our people. So
you're led to land on that.
Unless I see Labor move on those and include sovereignty into the Australian Constitution, that we are sovereign, or your legislation, then I'm not saying where I'm going. I want to see action.
So not yes or no
words.
Yet? No, not yet.
I'm not saying which way I'm going until I see action.
I might before we move on, I might just come back to you, Craig, because you have been sitting and listening to...
People are waiting.
Yeah, you have been sitting and listening to a lot of this. I know that you've come to this with an open mind, you want to explore the issues, but you get around and talk to people in your other role with the Republican movement as well. What's your mood of the people that you speak to amongst the Australian people? What are you sensing?
Well, what concerns me actually is the media. And I spoke to one of the editors of one of the major mastheads last week and saying that I think where the conversation is going, which is reflected in the questions, is concerning, because it's much like our recent elections where the misinformation is not being challenged by the journalists. And so my question is, what is the underlying knowledge base that a journalist should have to be speaking to either the opposition leader or any of the dissenting voices in this area? And so all of a sudden the narrative can start to be built that there's no detail. And you've just heard here that, the rebuttal to that,
but
right?
You're not following the detail.
And all of a sudden, so now Australia's starting to think, I think, improperly. And so my question to everyone I speak to is, well, have you read the co-design report from Calma and Langton? It's 272 pages long.
They're not adopting the Calma-Langton report, though, Craig. That's my point.
No, they said that it formed the foundations, the same as the previous government. The report, the recommendations, would form the foundations of moving forward, and that's guiding them.
Okay.
And that's what the
So if you
working
haven't read
group
it,
will...
That's right. So if
The first 20
journalists haven't
pages-
read it, how can you carry the conversation in a real, authentic way and truthful way to the Australian people? That, I think, that they need that grounding.
Yeah.
They need at least to have read it, so at least we can have a conversation like here
And
tonight.
hopefully
on
we're
real
having these
terms.
conversations, we're hearing these questions. This is part of the process.